This is the Black Sheepdog, broadcasting to you from the vast and mysterious depths of cyberspace, unleashed to bring you a message of truth and hope. Thank you for meeting me here. Recently, I had a surprising conversation with a woman I have known for quite some time. She's a fantastic pediatric surgeon, and by all accounts, you'd consider her very successful, from her lovely family to her medical practice. In addition, she travels to various parts of the world to help the poorest of the poor, performing her magic, so to speak, through surgery. She's a very skillful surgeon, and she saved many, many children in the course of her profession as a pediatric surgeon. I've known her for quite a few years, but not until recently did I know this. She told me this story. 40 years ago, her mother was a teenager living in the projects of Buffalo, New York. She became pregnant and was scared to death to tell anyone, including her devoutly Catholic parents. Her best friend was a woman of some means and knew her way around the world. She counseled her to have an abortion. And she took her to Puerto Rico, where she knew of a doctor that performed abortions. She just didn't see any other way out. As a young girl, she was terribly frightened. Society was different then, and there wasn't a lot of understanding about these difficult things. Well, she had no financial means, no support, and it was a miserable, hard decision for her to have to terminate her pregnancy. Well, her friend took her to San Juan, where she spent a sleepless night, and then they took a cab. Not a very great area of the city, entered a dark-looking building that seemed cold in the warm, humid night. They walked down a corridor. They saw a woman that looked something like a picture she had seen before, but she didn't really exactly know who it was. The woman simply said to her, "I am the mother of the unborn. Do not do what you are about to do." She was so filled with remorse and fear, she ran out of the building with her friend in hot pursuit. She refused to have the abortion. They returned to Buffalo, and with the help of a Catholic charity, she gave birth to a child. She worked very, very hard as a maid for many years. She labored in a factory as well. She cared for her child with the help of relatives and friends. And to say that her choice resulted in an easy life for her would be untrue. However, today she's a woman of peace, living in a very nice home with all of the joy and the peace that comes from making a hard but correct decision. She's very proud also, very proud of her only daughter, the surgeon. And thanks to the woman that she now insists was the Virgin of Guadalupe, the patroness of the unborn. Well, you don't have to believe that story, but I'll tell you what, my physician surgeon friend swears that her mother believes it. I think it's probably true. Abortion, the truth and the hope. In this series, the first for the Black Sheepdog, I'll cover 4 major themes in this extremely controversial and divisive element of our contemporary society. In the first one, we will talk about the dark logic of abortion. In the second, we'll talk about the very controversial Supreme Court decision, Roe versus Wade. What were they thinking? Third, we'll talk about the social and political fallout from abortion. And finally, we'll talk about hope for the future. Is there any? You've got to start at the beginning. And the beginning of this conversation has to be about, well, when does life begin? Listen, if it isn't human from the moment of conception, it will never be human. Development as the criteria for determining when human life begins is absurd. Who decides? Who decides when that will be? That's a subjective and arbitrary decision. Listen, if what you're talking about is development as the criteria for determining when human life begins, well, then you can decide that a child at 6 months of age, because it's not fully developed, can be terminated. And logically, then at 6 years of age or 12 years of age, they're not fully developed. Development is not the proper criterion for determining when human life begins. When does it begin? The first moment of conception. And if you don't believe that, you just don't believe science. Those who would hold themselves as very sophisticated, very educated people will deny science when it stares them in the face. During a Senate subcommittee hearing, several physicians testified as to this. The topic of the hearing, of course, was when does human life begin? Dr. Jerome Lejeune, the father of modern genetics, said each of us has a very precise starting moment, which is the time at which the whole necessary and sufficient genetic information is gathered inside of one cell, the fertilized egg. And this is the moment of fertilization. There is not the slightest doubt about that. And we know that this information is written on a kind of ribbon which we call DNA. Dr. Jaime Gordon, chairman of the Department of Genetics at the Mayo Clinic, said, "By all the criteria of modern molecular biology, life is present. Human life is present from the moment of conception." And Dr. McCarthy DeMare, a medical doctor and law professor at the University of Tennessee, testified as follows: "The exact moment of the beginning of personhood and of the human body is at the moment of conception." Physician after physician, scientist after scientist testifies as to this fact, and it's the only logical conclusion that we can begin from. Human life begins at conception, not at some subjective and arbitrary point in the future. Because if you do that and use development as the criterion for establishing when a human being begins, then you can say a teenager isn't yet fully developed. Therefore, should you have a right to terminate the life of a teenager? They certainly can be inconvenient. They certainly can be expensive. They certainly can give you a lot of trouble. Logic is extremely important. And the dark and tortured logic of the contemporary abortion establishment is troubling indeed. Privacy as a criterion for permitting abortion, well, the Supreme Court talked about this, the right of privacy. We'll talk about this in the second presentation in this series when we look more deeply into Roe versus Wade. But listen, if the average man or woman looked at that Supreme Court decision and the criteria that they used for arriving at it, they would scratch their head in disbelief. Privacy as a criterion for permitting abortion is absolutely absurd. Think about this. What if the being in question was not hidden in the womb? Is it any more human at 7 months gestation or 9 months? More developed at 9 months, but no more human. A 7-month-old child, 7 months in the womb, that's a 7-month-old child, in a premature birth, has a way better than 50-50 chance of survival. Who survives? A child survives. What do you think it is in the womb? It can't be anything other than a child. It's not a choice, it's a child. And if it doesn't have those human characteristics from the moment of conception, it'll never be human. The full genetic package is present in the zygote. And if it's not human then, it will never be human. The Supreme Court made a bad decision, a very bad decision. And someone with common sense, or a lot of people with common sense, or a leader, someday maybe we'll get a leader in the White House, a leader will do what Abraham Lincoln did when he was faced with the Dred Scott decision that basically held that black people were less than human. Something less than human, hence they could be chattel, they could be held as property. They shouldn't have the same rights as other classes of human beings. A civil war rightly erupted because of that. Why? Why? Because these people were persecuted. Abraham Lincoln had the intelligence and the guts to do something about it. Now, I'm not advocating for a civil war here, but I'm asking you to think, and think profoundly. If the subjugation of a class of people was enough to precipitate a civil war, and it was, and rightly so, what about another class of human beings? Who says they're human beings? Science says they're human beings from the first moment of conception. The Dred Scott decision is perfectly analogous to Roe versus Wade. And a class of human beings, the most innocent, the most helpless of all human beings, are being killed wantonly. And we'd better think about that. We'd better think about it long and hard, because the deterioration of Western civilization is well underway. And abortion is very much at the root of this deterioration. And what about the economic impact of abortion? You know, we have economic problems today all over the world, especially in the Western world. And the United States is not far behind the European countries, which are basically self-destructing economically. The economic impact of abortion is devastating. And at a time when a bad economy and the prospect of simultaneous inflation and recession threaten us, we had better soberly assess the effects of decades of abortions, tens of millions of abortions. Do you think those lost children have no economic impact on this country? Think about what we could have been. All of those lost children, the demographic impact that has resulted is likewise catastrophic. All of the great talent that was lost. You know, the pro-death mentality really has a dismal outlook on humanity, a dismal outlook on the prospects of humanity and individual human persons. They imagine that because perhaps a large number of aborted children come from disadvantaged families that they couldn't have amounted to much. Well, I told you the story at the beginning of this broadcast that that woman decided not to abort her baby. That child went on to become great. A great pediatric surgeon. Saved hundreds and hundreds of children. Which made their life possible, made their life better. I recall a story from the annals of St. Padre Pio in the Catholic Church. Padre Pio heard confessions for long hours. And he was sitting in the confessional, and a woman came in and knelt down, and amazingly, the priest jumped up and chased her out of the confessional and right down the corridor. Chased her right out of the building. Later that afternoon, she came back, very much disturbed, as you could understand. She said, "Why on earth did you do that? That's no way for a priest to act. No way for a confessor to act." He said, "I'll tell you why I became so upset. The moment you knelt down in the confessional, I had a vision of the greatest pope who ever was. And that was the son you aborted. The demographic impact is catastrophic. The number of great scientists who could have solved any number of problems, shortages of food, would be laughable. They'd solve these problems so quickly. All the scientists, all the physicians, all the great minds, the artists, the musicians, that would never be, because it was decided, for whatever reason, that they should be terminated. Then there's the absurd proposition that if a woman brings life into the world, she can end life. Really? Oh, that's the position of some radical feminists, some that practice Wiccan spirituality, a form of witchcraft. If a woman brings life into the world, then she can end life. No, God brings life into the world, and only God can end life. The woman certainly cooperates in that, and so does the man. No one has the authority, properly speaking, to say when life begins and when life ends. There's never a real intellectual argument when you listen to the so-called pro-choice people. It always degenerates into a purely emotional argument. They just can't sustain a rational argument. They end up attacking the people on the other side. They're too conservative. They're too this, they're too that. They're not sympathetic to women. I've talked to probably hundreds of women in my life who've had abortions. And if you think you did them a favor by facilitating their choice, you haven't talked to them like I have. There are always a dead and a wounded people when it comes to abortion. The child is dead and the mother is wounded. It may not be evident at first. At first, it's probably relief in most cases, but very quickly, a sickness in the pit of the stomach sets in, and it's not physical. There are physical problems. You know, the Supreme Court decision was predicated upon the fallacious presupposition that abortion today is perfectly safe. It's not perfectly safe. There are all kinds of physiological problems, infections, bleeding, on and on and on, sterility even. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of the effects of abortion are psychological, a kind of post-abortion stress syndrome. It can be devastating. It can leave the poor woman wounded to the point where she limps through life more frightened than when she had begun, sick at what she had done. Right to choose? Choose what? That's an example of what I call verbal engineering. We've heard that so many times. Well, a woman should have a right to choose. Choose what? Choose to end the life of another human being? Well, a woman should have a right to control her own body. It's not her body, it's somebody else's. Certainly intimately related to her, but separate. Another living human being. Not a potential child. A child with potential. Those who argue against the right to life from the moment of conception, as I've said, they defy science, they defy logic, and they defy every traditional sense of morality. Not just Christians, but in the Jewish tradition, even in the Muslim tradition, so many. Life is sacred. You know, it's just a pure rationalization. That's the only way I can fathom how people can justify a pro-choice position. Pure, absolute rationalization. The most intellectually advanced people with doctorate degrees, highly educated, highly sophisticated people, to assume that position, look, nobody's that stupid. To assume that position, you have engaged in the most radical form of rationalization and self-justification. Because someone is a judge, a Supreme Court justice, a physician, or anything else. This doesn't guarantee they're wise or even capable of thinking in accord with simple logic and right reason. Some simple, humble old farmer is apt to have a heck of a lot more wisdom than some educated people. And don't think that advanced technology guarantees wisdom. Technology is a great thing, but it's one of the lower levels of knowledge. Wisdom is in short supply. Where are the leaders that have wisdom? And we are very much in need of that kind of wise, strong, enlightened leadership. We have a crisis of leadership today in the world. If we didn't, this could not exist. Almost 50 million abortions since Roe versus Wade, hundreds of millions of abortions worldwide. If we had strong, wise, enlightened leadership, this could not be. This goes against human nature. It is unnatural. One of the things, though, that has to be done, and perhaps hasn't been done to the extent it should be done, is that women need to be helped. When they're in a hard spot like this, they find themselves frequently between a rock and a hard place. They need to have choices, indeed. They need to have choices, but murder is not a choice, it's a crime. And taking the life of an unborn child, that's established by contemporary science, by logic, and any wise scrutiny, objectively, of the situation. You've got to have choices. Women should have choices. Murder's not a choice, murder's a crime. To take the life of an innocent, unborn child, that's murder, by any definition. Well, a right to choose what? No one has the right to choose to end the life of another real human being. And from the moment of conception, you have a real human being. The full genetic package is present. That is a human being with great, unlimited potential. Imagine, my friend the pediatric surgeon, if her mother had gone through with that abortion, she would have never seen the light of day. The world would have been deprived of her great gifts. And how many millions of times over has the world been deprived of the great gifts that these unborn children could have brought to a tortured and troubled world? Oh, if people were only able to see how truly human these little beings really are, they would never sit still for a moment for the outrage of abortion. It's a lot easier to be callous when you're not presented with the reality. Your life in the womb is something magnificent. On the first day your life began, at the moment of conception, and no other time does human life begin. It begins at the moment of conception. And anything other than that is merely a subjective and arbitrary determination by an imperfect human being, Supreme Court justice, physician, or otherwise. On day 7, you were implanted in the wall of your mother's uterus. On day 10, your mother's menstrual cycle stopped. On day 18, your little heart began to beat. On day 21, you pumped your own blood with your own blood type through a separate, closed circulatory system, not your mother's, your own. And on day 28, your eyes and your ears and your entire respiratory system began to form. It was complete. Day 42, your brain waves were recorded. Your skeleton was complete. Your reflexes were present. At 7 weeks of age, you sucked your thumb, and at 8 weeks, all your body systems were present. At 9 weeks of age, you squinted, you swallowed, you moved your tongue, and you made a fist. At 11 weeks, all of your body systems worked. You breathed spontaneously. Your fingernails were present. At 12 weeks of age, you weighed 1 ounce. At 16 weeks, your genital organs were clearly differentiated. You grasped with your hands, swam, kicked, turned, and somersaulted. All this still not felt by your mother. At 18 weeks, your vocal cords worked, and you could cry. And at 20 weeks, you had hair on your head, you weighed 1 pound and were 12 inches long. A real human being. And how many abortions take place after 20 weeks, even right up to full term? It's a nightmare that's hard to imagine. There can be a very real argument that because the little child is not seen, it's easier to dispose of it. Well, it's the same argument that can be made throughout this entire tortured history of humanity. Nazi Germany, the persecution of Jews and Christians as well. If you could have seen the average German person, if they could have seen the daily life of the average Jew, how they cared for their children, how they loved their children, how they worked hard, how their heart beat the same as theirs did, how they laughed and cried, it would have been a lot harder to persecute them had they known them. And the same in the tortured annals of communism. If those who were persecuted, if the average person could have seen their daily life, could have seen how similar they are to themselves, it could have never happened. And so it is with the child in the womb, because it's out of sight, easier to persecute, easier to terminate that little existence. Oh, there can be a real argument made that abortion is a form of genocide. A class of human beings. Oh, in this case, they're not Jews. In this case, they're not black people. In this case, they are unborn human beings who are unwanted. A real category of persons, and they are persecuted to the point of death. If science says, and it does say without any question, that life begins at conception, then how on earth can we permit such an outrage? How can we permit such an outrage to go on? Well, a civil war, as I said, was rightly fought to liberate a class of human beings every bit as valuable as any other class of human being, to set them free from a hard and cruel life. Well, that was a noble cause, and Abraham Lincoln was right to take steps to overturn a bad Supreme Court decision, Dred versus Scott. They made a mistake with that, and they've made a mistake with Roe versus Wade. How much more a noble cause to intervene and save the lives of the most helpless, the most innocent of our brothers and sisters. And you don't have to fight a civil war. All you have to do is vote. If you're going to be pro-life, you have to advocate. You have to personalize. These are little human beings, our brothers and sisters. Got to interiorize that. If 11-year-old children were singled out for extermination, I assure you we'd rise up and would not let it happen. Children in the womb are no less human. Development is not the right criterion for establishing when human life begins. Human life logically and scientifically and absolutely begins at the moment of conception and no other time. To depersonalize this issue is to enable evil. Like I said, if the average German could have seen the daily life of the average Jew, it couldn't have happened. They loved their children just as the Germans loved their children. They took care of their elderly. They laughed, they cried. They would have never permitted such a monster as Hitler to exterminate 6 million of them. And the same with the slaves. And so it must be with the unborn. If we saw how real they are, how human, we could never permit such an outrage to continue. The dark allies of abortion and other anti-life forces were with the Nazis and the communists, the eugenic movement, population control, which minimizes the supreme dignity of each and every human life, the sacred nature of each and every human life, regardless of ethnic, religious origin. Every single human being absolutely sacred, dignified, not because of anything other than their humanity. And that humanity is established from the first moment of conception. Abortion is frighteningly close to child sacrifice. It's terrifying. No force for good in history has ever been in favor of the sacrifice of the innocent and the young. Yet, if we believe science and we believe logic and we believe right reason, we have to accept the fact that abortion is usually the unwitting sacrifice of the most helpless and innocent of human beings. I've often told the story about the great Catholic Archbishop Fulton Sheen, probably the greatest preacher of the 20th century, how he was flying on an airplane during Lent, and the flight attendant brought lunch. Bishop Sheen said, well, it's a Friday in Lent. I think I'll skip lunch today. It'd be good for me to fast a little bit. There was a nice-looking woman sitting next to him, and she said, yeah, I'll skip lunch too. And the bishop perked up and said, oh, are you Catholic, also fasting for Lent? And she responded, no, I'm a witch, and I'm fasting for abortions. And she told the dark tale of how the offering of the most innocent and helpless of human blood brought power to the proponents of Satanism and witchcraft. Oh, make no mistake about it, the average person who has an abortion or even performs an abortion has nothing to do with Satanism or witchcraft. But the Satanists and the witches, the bad ones, love this because they offer that sacrifice in order to get power. How? It's just an act of the will. Same in the sacramental principle. In the Christian tradition, sacrifice is offered. Of course, the supreme sacrifice was offered by Jesus Christ on the cross. He offered himself, sacrificed himself. And then when we're one with him, we can offer our sacrifices as well. Well, there's a reverse of that. On the other side, on the dark side, at its basis, there's a spiritual combat that goes on in this kind of thing. I know those who don't believe will slough that off as nonsense. And right now, it's not my business to try to convince you of that. I tried to do that for 20 years. But one day you'll find out these things are real. The battle between good and evil is real. But we'll just talk about science here. We'll just talk about reality. Spiritual reality is the highest reality. But at the Senate subcommittee hearings investigating the question of when human life begins, I referenced 3 physicians who testified at those hearings earlier on. But there was also an anesthesiologist who testified, Dr. Paul E. Rockwell. He gave a haunting testimony of the reality of the truly human activity of a very small child in the womb. Listen to what Dr. Rockwell testified to. 11 years ago, while giving an anesthetic for a ruptured ectopic pregnancy at 8 weeks gestation, I was handed what I believe was the smallest living human being ever seen. The embryonic sac was intact, and transparent. Within the sack was a tiny human male, swimming extremely vigorously in the amniotic fluid, while attached to the wall by the umbilical cord. This tiny human was perfectly developed with long tapering fingers, feet, and toes. It was almost transparent as regards the skin, and the delicate arteries and veins were prominent to the ends of the fingers. The baby was extremely alive and swam about the sack approximately 1 time per second with a natural swimmer's stroke. This tiny human did not look at all like the photos and drawings and models of embryos which I had seen, nor did it look like a few of the embryos I've been able to observe since then. Obviously, because this one was alive. When the sack was opened, the tiny human immediately lost his life and took on the appearance of what is accepted as the appearance of an embryo at this stage of life, with blunt extremities, etc. It's a child. It's a child. It's a child. It's not a choice. It is in truth alone that we have hope, and that hope burns brightly in the night. This is the Black Sheepdog, unleashed and very much alive. Until next time, God keep you safe in His love and His mercy.
Thank you.